The hushed snickers began before the seatbelt signs were off. A lone woman in a worn-out jacket, eyes closed, lips moving silently as her fingers traced imaginary patterns on her tray table. To the polished executives beside her, she was the perfect target for quiet ridicule, another eccentric passenger to endure. They traded smirks, making low comments about her being away with the fairies or practicing some dubious meditation. She ignored them, her calm undisturbed. But 38,000 feet in the air, when a desperate, trembling voice crackled through the cockpit intercom, begging for anyone with tactical flight experience, her eyes snapped open. And the men who had mocked her fell dead silent as she unbuckled her belt with the steady, deliberate grace of a soldier heading into battle. The cabin of Global Airways Flight 422 hummed with a mundane rhythm of mid-flight. The meal service had concluded, and the recycled air carried the faint smells of coffee and plastic-wrapped sandwiches. In Seat 12B, Dr. Eris Thorne sat perfectly still. Her short, practical hair was tinged with gray, and her face, devoid of makeup, carried the gentle weathering of someone who spent more time looking at horizons than mirrors. Her hands rested on the fold-down tray, her index fingers moving in slow, precise arcs, tracing vectors and trajectories only she could see. Her lips formed silent words: airspeed, descent angle, crosswind component. To her left, in 12A, a man in a tailored suit, Leo, glanced at her and then to his colleague, Marcus, in the aisle C12C. He gave an almost imperceptible eye roll. Marcus suppressed a grin. They were returning from a lucrative financial conference, their heads buzzing with figures and deals. This woman, in her faded olive-green jacket and sensible boots, was an oddity in their first-class bubble. Probably manifesting a lottery win, Leo whispered behind his hand, not quietly enough. Or trying to telepathically summon a better snack, Marcus murmured back, taking a sip of his gin and tonic. Their laughter was a soft, prickly sound. A flight attendant passing by offered a tight, professional smile, her eyes flickering to Eris with a hint of sympathy. But Eris was miles away, or rather, years away. She was in a different cockpit, the air not smelling of recycled familiarity, but of avgas, sweat, and desert dust. The vibrations she felt weren't from twin-jet engines, but from the raw, thunderous power of a General Electric turbofan in an F-16 Fighting Falcon. She was running through emergency drills, a mental gymnasium she visited daily to keep the memories and the skills sharp. The captain's voice, smooth and reassuring, had been giving periodic updates about smooth air ahead. Then it stopped. For 10 minutes, there was only the white noise of flight. A faint frown touched Eris's brow. Her mental calculations paused. She listened not to the sounds, but to the silence. The absence of the routine was a signal. When the voice returned, it was not the same. It was strained, a wire pulled too tight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a minor technical issue with the co-pilot. We request any medical personnel on board to identify themselves to a flight attendant immediately. A ripple of concern spread through the cabin. People looked around. A man a few rows back tentatively raised his hand. The flight attendant rushed him toward the front. The curtain to the business class section swished shut. The plane flew on. Leo leaned toward Marcus. Hope it's not serious. I've got a meeting at 4. Eris's hands had gone still. Her eyes were fixed on the seat back in front of her, but she was seeing instrument panels, warning lights. A minor technical issue with a crew member didn't warrant that specific tremor in a captain's voice. She felt the old awareness seep back in her bones, the hypervigilance she'd spent a decade trying to soften. 20 minutes later, the plane gave a sudden, slight lurch. It was not turbulence. It was a correction, an unprofessional one. Passengers gasped. The fastened seatbelt sign dinged back on. Then, the lurch came again, more pronounced. A flight attendant stumbled in the aisle, her face pale. The intercom crackled. This time, it was pure, undiluted panic, a sound no passenger should ever hear from the flight deck. Mayday, mayday. Is there... Oh, God. Is there anyone on this plane who has experienced flying a fighter jet? Anyone? I need help up here now. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the desperate whine of the engines. 200 people froze. The question was so bizarre, so terrifyingly specific, it seemed like a nightmare. Leo and Marcus stared at each other, their previous smugness evaporating into raw fear. A fighter jet? What the hell? Leo breathed, and then movement. The click of a seatbelt unbuckling, sharp in the quiet. Eris stood up. She smoothed her worn jacket, and her face, once soft and distant, was now a mask of focused calm. The look in her eyes had changed completely. It was as if a different person had been wearing her skin. She stepped into the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but clear, not to the stunned men beside her, but to the flight attendant who was gripping his seat back for support. "Tell the captain that retired Lieutenant Colonel Eris Thorne, United States Air Force, F-16 pilot with over 3,000 hours, is coming to the cockpit." She began walking forward, her stride long and steady. As she passed rows of terrified, bewildered faces, she heard a choked whisper from behind her. It was Leo. Oh my God! She did not look back. The curtain to the business class cabin felt heavier than fabric as Eris pushed through. The flight attendant, a young man named Ben whose nameplate was slightly askew, looked at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. You're serious?" he stammered. "Open the door, please," Eris said, her voice leaving no room for debate. It was the voice she'd used on nervous rookies, the voice that cut through cockpit chaos. Ben fumbled with the keypad beside the reinforced cockpit door, his fingers shaking. The electronic lock buzzed, and the door swung inward. The scene inside was a stark contrast to the sterile calm of the passenger cabin. The cockpit was bathed in the harsh, greenish glow of instrument panels, and the air was thick with sweat and fear. Captain David Riggs, a man in his late 50s with a close-cropped gray beard, was wrestling with the control yoke, his knuckles white. In the right seat, First Officer Kevin Anders was slumped forward, held only by his harness. He was conscious but dazed, his face ashen, one arm hanging limp and twitching. A small bottle of prescription medication had fallen to the floor. A senior flight attendant, Maria, was crouched beside him, holding a damp cloth to his forehead, her own face a mask of professional concern battling deep alarm. "Captain," Eris said, announcing herself. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne. What's your situation?" Riggs didn't turn, his eyes glued to the array of screens. Anders had a severe reaction to new medication. Seizure-like activity, partial paralysis on his right side. He's non-responsive for duties. I've been flying solo for 40 minutes, trying to get us to an alternate, but we've hit a weather front. It's a mess of wind shear and thunderstorms ahead. The autopilot can't handle it, and I can't manage the corrections, the radios, and the navigation alone. Not in this. The plane shuddered again, as if to emphasize his point. Eris took it all in with a sweeping glance. The layout was familiar in principle, alien in specifics. This was an Airbus A330, a wide-body commercial bus, not her nimble, single-seat Viper. But the language of flight was universal. Attitude, airspeed, altitude, heading. "I need the seat," she said, her tone not asking, but informing. "Who are you?" Riggs finally glanced at her, seeing a middle-aged woman in casual clothes, his hope warring with disbelief. "Call sign Sphinx. 389th Fighter Squadron, 35th Operations Group. I flew combat sorties over the Gulf and spent 5 years as an instructor at Randolph. I can fly this plane, Captain, but you need to let me in." The call sign did it. It held a weight, a history that cut through his panic. He gave a sharp, jerky nod. "Maria, help Kevin out. Quickly." It was an awkward, painful ballet. Maria unbuckled the moaning first officer. Eris helped guide his weight out of the seat and into the care of the attendant and Ben, who had entered to assist. The co-pilot was gently laid on the floor in the small space behind the seats. As soon as the seat was free, Eris slid in. Her hands, which had been tracing imaginary patterns minutes before, now settled on the familiar shapes of a throttle quadrant and a side-stick controller. It felt alien and familiar at once. She buckled the 5-point harness, pulling the straps tight across her shoulders, a sensation that sent a jolt of memory through her. "Talk to me, Captain. What's our immediate threat?" she asked, her eyes already scanning the primary flight display, PFD, and navigation display, ND. Thunderstorm cluster, massive, about 50 miles ahead. We need to deviate north, but the diversion airports are socked in with fog. Nearest clear option is Bradley, but it's 200 miles away. We're heavy with fuel, and I'm getting overwhelmed with ATC rerouting us through other traffic. I've lost the picture. Eris could hear the strain in his voice. Flying a modern jet was as much about managing systems and information as it was about stick and rudder skills. He was task-saturated, a pilot's worst nightmare. "Okay, new roles. You are pilot flying. I am pilot monitoring and systems manager. You fly the aircraft. I will talk to ATC, handle the navigation, and run the checklists. Give me your headset." The shift in dynamic was immediate. Riggs, a competent pilot now drowning, was thrown a lifeline. By taking the communication and system management burden, Eris freed him to do the one thing he could still manage: keep the wings level. He nodded, handing her a spare headset. She plugged it in. The radio was a cacophony of urgent voices. "Global 422, say your intentions. Global 422, turn left heading 270, vector for weather avoidance. Global 422, climb and maintain flight level 350. Eris keyed the mic. Her voice, when it went out over the airwaves, was cool, steady, and authoritative. "Boston Center, Global 422. We are declaring a full emergency, medical, and operational. We have a single pilot resource situation. Request direct routing to Bradley International and a block altitude from FL 330 to FL 350 for ride conditions. We require a priority clearance through all traffic. Stand by for our fuel status and medical requirements." The response was instantaneous, the controller's voice shifting from harried to focused. "Roger, Global 422. You are clear direct to Bradley. Climb and maintain FL 350. Traffic cleared out of your way. What is the nature of your medical emergency?" "First officer incapacitated, possible severe adverse drug reaction. We will require medical services on landing. Now, I need a full weather scan for our route. And patch me through to your supervisor. I need to speak with someone who can coordinate with the nearest Air Force base for a possible teleconference consult." In the seat beside her, Captain Riggs's shoulders relaxed a fraction. He was flying again. The plane's movements became smoother. Back in seat 12A, Leo felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. The murmurs in the cabin were a low, anxious hum. The plane had stabilized somewhat, but the tension was a physical presence. The woman they had laughed at was now behind a locked door, speaking in a tongue of emergencies and altitudes. The flight attendants moved with a forced calm, but their eyes were scared. "She was a fighter pilot?" Marcus whispered, his face ashen. "We were making jokes about a fighter pilot." Leo couldn't answer. He remembered the precise way she had unbuckled her belt, the lack of hesitation. He thought of his own soft hands, used to tapping keyboards and shaking hands, and felt a profound, shameful smallness. The plane jolted again, harder this time, and a collective gasp went up. A child started crying. Leo closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he prayed not for a closed deal, but simply for the steady hands of the woman he'd mocked. In the cockpit, Eris was a whirlwind of focused action. Her left hand danced across the flight management computer, FMC, inputting the new direct route. Her right hand was on a separate radio, now connected to a conference call. A stern voice came through. "This is Major Collins at Barnes Air National Guard Base. Who am I speaking with?" "Retired Lieutenant Colonel Eris Thorne. Call sign Sphinx. I'm in the right seat of Global 422. We have a single healthy pilot flying a heavy A330 through severe weather towards an unfamiliar airport with an incapacitated FO. I need you to be my second brain. I'm looking at the weather radar returns. I see a gap here at this coordinate. Confirm. There was a pause, the sound of keys clacking. Confirmed, Sphinx. That's your gate. It's narrow, but it's the only one. You have about an 8-mile window. Wind shear reported on the lee side. Understood. She turned to Riggs. David, I need a 15-degree left turn in 30 seconds. We're threading a needle. 15 left, he repeated, his voice firmer now. Eris then pulled up the landing performance data for Bradley. The numbers were not good. They were heavy. The weather was deteriorating there, as well with crosswinds, and the runway was shorter than ideal for their weight. She ran the calculations twice. We're too heavy to land safely at Bradley, she said flatly. We need to dump fuel. Riggs grimaced. I've never done it. It's not a standard procedure for this route. Then, today is your lucky day. I'll talk you through it. She keyed the mic again. Boston, Global 422. We are overweight for landing at Bradley. Requesting permission to initiate a fuel dump in a holding pattern over the prescribed area. Also, we need the longest available runway. Is 6/24 still the longest? Affirmative, Global 422. Cleared for fuel dump at holding point Echo. Advise when dumping is complete. For the next 20 minutes, Eris guided Riggs through the complex, rarely used procedure. Her instructions were clear, sequential, and devoid of emotion. Open the dump mast valves, monitor the fuel flow, watch the balance. It was a delicate operation, like bleeding a giant metal beast. Outside, a stream of jet fuel vaporized into a fine mist behind the wings. Inside the cabin, passengers, seeing the white plume, grew more anxious. Flight attendants made calming announcements, their eyes betraying their own fear. As the fuel quantity decreased, the plane became more responsive. Riggs began to feel a semblance of control returning. But Eris was already on to the next problem. She pulled up the approach plates for runway 24 at Bradley. The crosswind component was at the very limit of the aircraft's capability, gusting dangerously. This is going to be a crosswind landing, she told Riggs. We'll use the Crabbit approach. I'll call out your deviations. You focus on the sink rate and airspeed. I'll handle the thrust. He swallowed hard. I've never done a max crosswind in sim. There's a first time for everything. I have. Her voice held the ghost of a smile. She'd landed her F-16 in sandstorms that turned day into night. This was different, but the principle was the same. Respect the wind, don't fight it, use it. The cockpit door cracked open. Maria's face appeared, strained. Kevin's condition is stable, but he's not improving. How much longer? 30 minutes to touchdown, Eris said, not taking her eyes off the navigation display. Tell the cabin to prepare for a possibly rough approach and landing. Medical to stand by. As Maria left, the plane entered the storm's outer edges. Turbulence began to buffet them, sharp jolts that would have turned into violent rolls without quick corrections. Eris's voice became a constant, calm stream in Riggs's ear. Watch your bank, slight right rudder. There's a shear, expect a drop, correcting with thrust. Good. You're doing fine, David. For Riggs, her voice was an anchor. He followed her commands instinctively, feeling a partnership forming. This wasn't a takeover. It was a reinforcement. She was building a new crew from the wreckage of the old one. As they broke out of the worst of the weather, the sprawl of Connecticut appeared below, lights blurred by rain. Bradley Airport was a welcome sight, its runways gleaming wet in the dusk. But the wind was howling, a fact confirmed by the windsocks standing straight out, whipping violently. Final checklist, Eris said, her fingers moving over the overhead panel. Flaps to position 3, landing gear down, 3 green. The gear locked into place with a heavy thump that reverberated through the fuselage. In the cabin, the sound was both terrifying and reassuring. They were coming home. Eris looked over at Riggs. His face was set in a mask of concentration, a single bead of sweat tracing a path from his temple. She felt a surge of respect for him. He was a line pilot, not a test pilot, and he was holding it together under unimaginable pressure. "You have the aircraft, Captain," she said softly. "I've got your back. Just follow my calls." He gave a tight nod. "I'm ready." The plane turned onto final approach. Through the rain-streaked windshield, the runway lights stretched ahead, a narrow ribbon of hope in the stormy gloom. The crosswind slammed into them, trying to push the massive Airbus sideways. Riggs crabbed the plane, pointing its nose into the wind while the track remained aligned with the runway. It was an unnatural, dizzying feeling. Eris's voice was the only sound in the cockpit now, calm and rhythmic. "Airspeed alive. Ref plus 10 for the gust, slight left drift, correcting. Watch your sink rate. Easy, easy, 200 feet. 100. The runway lights rushed up to meet them. The wind screamed. 50, 40, 30. Start your D-crab now. Left rudder, gently. Roll out level. Riggs's movements were jerky at first, then smooth as muscle memory, and Eris's coaching took over. The massive plane straightened, its nose aligning with the center line just seconds before touchdown. 2010 and flare. The main wheels touched down with a chirp of rubber, then a firm, solid thump as the weight settled. The wind still fought them, trying to lift a wing, but Riggs kept it centered, reverse thrust roaring. They were down, safely. In the cabin, a moment of stunned silence was followed by a deafening roar of applause, cheers, and sobs of relief. Leo and Marcus clutched their armrests, tears streaming down their faces, not from fear anymore, but from a profound, humbling gratitude. In the cockpit, Riggs brought the plane to a slow rollout and guided it off the runway onto a taxiway. He followed the ground controller's instructions to a remote stand where a fleet of flashing emergency vehicles awaited. Fire trucks, ambulances, their lights painting the rain in streaks of red and white. As the aircraft came to a final stop and Riggs shut down the engines, a deep, overwhelming silence descended, broken only by the patter of rain on the cockpit windows and the hiss of hydraulic systems settling. He slumped back in his seat, his body trembling with spent adrenaline. He turned to look at the woman beside him. Eris Thorne was unbuckling her harness, her movements slow, methodical. The fierce concentration had drained from her face, leaving behind the quiet, tired-looking woman from seat 12B. But her eyes held a light he hadn't seen before, a deep, quiet satisfaction. "Thank you," Riggs said, the words utterly inadequate. "You saved us. You saved everyone." Eris gave a small, weary smile. "We saved everyone, Captain. You flew the plane." She looked past him, out at the emergency vehicles approaching. "You should go see to your first officer. And your passengers." She stood up, her body stiff from the tension. She moved past the still unconscious co-pilot being attended by Maria and pushed open the cockpit door. The first-class cabin was quiet now, the celebrations having given way to a hushed, exhausted anticipation. Every pair of eyes was fixed on her as she stepped out. The flight attendants, their professional composure finally breaking, looked at her with something akin to awe. As she walked down the aisle toward her seat to collect her small bag, people reached out to touch her sleeve, whispering, "Thank you, God bless you." She acknowledged them with small nods, her expression unreadable. She stopped at row 12. Leo and Marcus were standing in the aisle, waiting. Their expensive suits were rumpled, their faces pale and streaked. They looked like boys caught in a terrible mistake. Leo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He tried again. "Colonel." His voice broke. Eris looked at them. She saw their shame, their profound regret. She remembered their quiet laughter, but it felt like something from another lifetime, a trivial noise from a world that no longer existed. The sky had judged them all today, and such pettiness had been burned away. She didn't smile, but her gaze was not unkind. "It's over," she said simply, her voice quiet but clear in the silent cabin. "You're safe. Go home." She collected her worn duffel bag from the overhead bin, slung it over her shoulder, and continued toward the forward door where the air stairs were being attached. She did not look like a conquering hero, just a tired woman heading home after a very long, unexpected day's work. Outside, in the cool, rain-washed air, a paramedic approached her. "Ma'am, do you need to be checked out?" Eris shook her head. "I'm fine. See to the others." She stood for a moment on the tarmac, the wind, now just a breeze, tugging at her hair. She looked up at the dark, clearing sky, where the storm was retreating to the east. For the first time in years, the ghosts in that sky felt quiet. The memories of a different cockpit, of different emergencies, did not claw at her. They felt settled, honored. A man in a uniform, the airport's head of operations, rushed up to her, followed by a reporter with a camera. "Colonel Tone, the press wants a statement." "You're a hero." Eris held up a hand. "The crew of this flight are the heroes. I just helped out." No statement. She walked away from the lights, the clamor, into the quiet gloom of the terminal building. Behind her, the passengers began to disembark, each stepping onto the solid ground with a new appreciation for it. Leo and Marcus were among the last, their heads bowed, speaking in low, earnest tones, their world forever altered by the woman who had sat between them, silent and powerful, a force of nature they had foolishly tried to measure against their own tiny worth. And, high above, the sky, now empty of their plane, held only the stars, witnesses to the quiet courage that walks among us, often unseen, until the moment it is desperately, vitally needed.